Welcome back to The Perspective. We are with Wulan Danoekoesoemo, the co-founder of Lentera, Sintas, Indonesia. Now, you were talking earlier about how you established Lentera Indonesia back in the past, based on your personal, very personal experience, what you see and how the public reacts and towards this, what I say, catastrophe. Now, you mentioned something else, which also came across my mind about how easy we forget. I don't think it's just about the rape incidents, but about anything else, the bombings, anything, any big event that happened in Indonesia. We are very, sometimes I like to say we are a very forgiving nation, in a sense of, yeah, it happened, so, you know, we move on. But now, in your perspective, you've been in the industry, you've been giving support to victims for a couple of years now. How can we continue to talk about this, and how can we make sure this stays above the ground?
Right. I think one of the keywords would be empathy, because, like you said, it's either forgiving or because people usually think, oh, it happens, but it doesn't happen to me. Yeah. So if it doesn't happen to me, it probably will never happen to me, or I'm untouchable with these issues. Of course, that kind of perspective is going to be difficult to exercise empathy, and not to mention that in our education system, empathy is not one of the big issues as well. So that's why to keep it along with the momentum, it's not just us or some group of people to own these issues, because there will be time where we need other people to also start talking about it. That's why the approach needs to be multi ways, because at the moment the approach that we're doing is through major campaigns, educations, speaking in different medias, etc. But after this, after the wave has ceased, what's going to happen? So we can continue by picking up these issues, by talking about it in our most modest way, with friends, with families. Put ourselves in their shoes. What happened if it happens to me? Yep. Would I want to be forgotten a month from now, a year from now? Then what's going to happen if I was forgotten? How would I feel about it? And how do I think the communities or the governments should respond to these kinds of issues?
Because the agony, the sadness, the sorrow does not stop for the victims. They carry that their entire life. So we should be able to give them support for as long as they need that.
I mean, sexual violence is one of the most traumatic events that a person can experience, because it attacks physically, mentally, psychologically, and sexually. There's a lot of social functions that can be damaged there, and it's not a typhoid, or it's not a fever that goes away after 2 or 3 days. The physical wounds might recover in a few weeks or a few months, but the trauma, the wounds that are not seen, are usually the hardest to heal.
It's there for life. Every 2 hours, violence against women occur. 35 women become victims every day here in Indonesia. Sexual violence ranks second in the list of violence against women. Last year, 16,000 reported cases. 11,000 of them are actually personal, which means the victim knows the person, the perpetrator, the offender. 5,000 are community. So what I'd like to focus on is, we talked earlier on the sidelines. Let the government do their job with the regulations and the law, and we do what we can.
Yes.
However, there's the past few weeks, I think there's very little talk or focus given on the towards the victims. Yeah. So we talk about how we punish, castration, the severity of punishment, but how can we help the victims survive and restore them back to the community?
I think it's important to have common understandings about the sexual violence issues first, before we can adopt the proper reactions to that. One of the most common misconceptions about sexual violence issue is that there's always a room to blame the women or the victims, and that is something that most likely would prevent victims or survivors to report because of shame, because of guilt, because they tend to believe that it's probably their fault. Well, it's not. It's never their fault. But that's what, you know, that's what the common discriminations that is happening in the community. So I think education is essential to make sure that everyone understands about these issues, and not blaming the victims. That's for one. Be there to listen, and do not push them to do something that they're not ready to, because we understand that they've gone through something that is very traumatizing, very damaging. If we push them to do something that they don't want to do, it's gonna be like forcing them to face something that they're not ready to, especially, you know, when you're reporting the case. Of course, we would like more victims or survivors to report, because that would spike the number as well and shows the urgencies, and step up and be inspiring to other survivors, share the courage and everything. However, too often the law enforcers, the first responders, are not equipped or well aware about the issues as well. So
the system itself is not very responsive to
it's not very friendly to victims and survivors. Therefore, sometimes the questions can be very intimidating and make them very uncomfortable. Treating
them just as equally as other crimes, which is a big hole in the system. We'll come back after the short break.